Awesome. Amen. Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Right.
I'm gonna add my welcome to Janet's. I'm Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm in New York, and I'm really happy to be here tonight, as always. For those of you that are new or might not know me, I'll give you very brief before I jump into the topic. My little brief history, of me. I'm a compulsive overeater of the seemingly hopeless variety, and my experience with food addiction and having this food obsession and compulsion um, has been something that's been in a part of my life, part of my experience throughout all of my growing up. I've had years of thinking that I can control it, which basically meant I had some years where I was a normal body weight, but most of the time I was, even in a normal body weight, I was doing crazy things to try to control my eating and the physical results of my eating. And at the end of my rope, it was over 11, it'll be 12 years in February. So like 11 and a half years ago, after coming in and out and in and out. At that point, I was over 300 pounds. I was beside myself. I really completely surrendered. And and I began to follow directions with intensity, sincerity. I was willing to do anything for relief from this obsession because I had really come to that conclusion that I could no longer do this on my own. And what happened for me was I had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps where God entered my heart and life and changed me from the inside out. And I've been relieved of over 160 pounds. I've lived in a normal sized body for a number of years. And even better than that, I don't think about food. I'm happily abstinent. I eat in agreement with my food plan, and I have a design for living that works. And part of that design for living is carrying the message, is doing these kind of things, and it really is. It's not only my obligation, but it is my greatest delight. I love nothing more. God is so good. He took the thing that I had to do and he made it into the thing that I love to do best of all. Love nothing more than talking about recovery and helping to the best of my ability those that suffer from this, because I've been granted a miracle, and I know that anybody is capable of having the same miraculous experience. That's just how good this God is. So I'm going to jump into the topic now. Right now, you got like a little brief. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is why I do it. And so we're going to talk about willingness. And in the big book, Into Action, on page 76, it says this: we have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And that really is the topic. That's the title of this topic. Willingness is indispensable. And so, I'm a word person. I like to look up definitions. I think it's pretty intentional, the words that were selected when this book was written. My belief is that this is a book that was perhaps written by Bill, but truly God's message. And so I think the words in the text are very deliberate and important. So indispensable, when I look it up, it means absolutely necessary, essential, crucial, key, vital, needed, and required. So that's what willingness is. Cannot do this program if you don't have willingness. And so then what is willingness? If it's that important, let's look at what it actually means. And then we'll talk about where the book highlights the things we're going to need to be willing to do. Um, so, willingness means inclined or favorably disposed in mind. It means ready, prepared mentally or physically for some experience or some action, prepared for immediate use, prompt to act or respond, right? That's willing. Prompt to act, prompt to respond, done, born, accepted by choice or without reluctance. So when you're willing to do something, it's almost like it was an idea born inside of you, and you really do it without hesitation. Um, and for, of, or relating to the will or power of choosing. So that oftentimes there are things. So if one idea is that it's like born and it's just something you do without any thought at all, right? And the other one is it's a choice. And there are lots of things. And Janet's given a great example at one time, and I've thought about this a lot when I was crafting this, that there are things that I've done, let's say as a mom, right? When my babies were infants. I thought there was a perfect example. Did I love getting out of bed in the middle of the night and changing a dirty diaper? No. It was not something, but I was willing to do it. Even like sacrifice my sleep and my comfort to do something because it was essentially important to me, and therefore I did it, right? And so sometimes that is very often what it is in this program initially, right? Or even at times not initially. um, in the big book, the appendix, 2, in the spiritual experience, it says this on page 568: willingness, honesty, and open mindedness are the essentials of recovery. So it's essential, absolutely necessary, extremely important, key, vital, needed, required. Like, yep, all of that. So, what makes us willing? If that's something we're going to need, how do we get it? How do we get willing? Um, I think about willingness is born out of desperation. Desperation has a lot to do with willingness. And desperation, is that feeling you've got no other options, and then it's not just desperation. Because if I were just desperate alone, feeling like I got no other options left, that might propel me to do nothing. That might make me feel like, forget it. I'm powerless. I'm never going to get anywhere. So there's another requirement another component that makes up willingness. And I think about it like this: it's like 100 parts desperation and then like a sprinkle of hope, because it's the hope that makes us willing to take the action. And so in the forward to the second edition, it talks about hope. In XVI, it says this: but when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. And why was it? It was because the broker, which we know is Bill, showed up as like a messenger of hope, because he described the hopeless condition, and yet he did not look like he was living in a hopeless condition any longer, and so that gave hope. And in Bill's story on page 12, it says, upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. So I think this is important information for us as we go out and carry this message, which we are actually supposed to do as soon as possible, right? To be able to take whatever glimmer of recovery we have, any seed of recovery that we're getting, we've got to show up with hope for those that are still suffering. And I think we must first use our words to drive home the hopelessness of this disease, which is part of the directions in the chapter Working with Others. We don't start off offering people false hope. We actually start off really discussing the horrors of this disease. So when I am having early conversations with people, whether they're in the rooms or out of the rooms, and I think somebody might suffer from this, I don't immediately start selling the solution to them. I talk about the hopelessness of the condition, how it was for me. I say, yeah, I could not stick to a diet no matter what I did. Or every time I went on a diet, it seemed like I always regained the weight. Or every time I was put the food down for a period of time, something would happen and I would pick it up again. And I would talk about that. And so we do that so that the sufferer begins to see that this can't be battled on our own. They get that idea. But then the other important thing to keep in mind is that we're supposed to show up like Ebby did, right? And Ebby showed up like this, fresh faced and glowing. Like you're supposed to, if you're here to carry the message, you're supposed to look like a messenger. You're supposed to carry yourself. Our words can create the desperation, but our deportment and our demeanor should carry the hope. And so, we kind of joke around a little bit like, I put on my lipstick before I'm going to speak before people. I try to put myself, um, and that might listen, if you're someone who doesn't wear lipstick and that's like, you find that offensive, that's okay. For me, I kind of grew up in a household. My mother would say to me, go put your lipstick on. Like that was code for kind of put yourself together a little bit. And I believe that when I show up to speak to people, I want to look as pleasing as possible. Put on a little makeup. I put on, I try to fix myself up just a little bit. Um, and and not only do I try to, I actually feel delighted. Like God has restored me. If I showed you, if you've ever seen my old pictures, what I looked like before, it was pain. I could hardly brush my hair. I just felt so defeated and so down. And today I have physical recovery and I have spiritual relief and I have a relationship with God. And yeah, it's easy to show up looking as best as I possibly can. Because I feel it internally, but I also think it's an important part of how we help people acquire willingness, how we help those that show up at our meeting who might say, I'm not willing yet, or I was directed to pray for the willingness. Well, I want to help them. That's my idea, to help them. So, you know, um, it also says in Bill's story, um, oh, it says, okay, so, I've heard people make light of people saying that they pray for willingness. And I remembered at one time saying, oh, that's so stupid, like praying for the willingness, as though, like, what does that mean? And yet I actually have thought about it repeatedly. And I thought, you know what? That's not just a silly way of saying I don't want to take action. It might be, but I think it actually can go further, because in Into Action on page 76, it actually tells us that if we cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. So, you know what? Maybe those people that are still clinging to not taking action, maybe prayer is, right? Why couldn't it help? And I think, they're referring to the defects in that passage and that the prayer to have God remove our defects. Well, what if the great defect that might be keeping somebody from making a start is fear, right? What if that's the big defect? I'm afraid. I'm afraid to get started. I've heard oftentimes people say, I'm afraid to get started because I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm afraid that people in my family are going to roll their eyes and say, well, there she goes again. One more thing that she's not able to do. And I remembered having that same thing. And so, well, God is capable of removing all fear. So, yeah, we can pray for the willingness too. And I think another defect that oftentimes keeps people from getting started is selfishness, because they're not willing to give up the way that they've been doing things, right? Their way. And that's selfishness, kind of hanging on to the way that I do it. I don't want to do that. I don't know that I'm willing. Well, we can pray for the removal of that too. And so praying for the willingness to make a start, I've discovered, yeah, it's nothing to roll my eyes at after all. I'm not going to roll my eyes to anybody praying for anything. Like, I think that would be pretty arrogant of me. I don't know what happened to me that one day I was crying my eyes out, my mouth bleeding from shredded wheat cereal. And it feels like I turned a page and I suddenly had all the willingness in the world to do anything to get better. Maybe it came from my prayer, that I said in the car that day to a God I didn't believe in. I cried out, God, help me. I am in trouble. And I believe prayer works. So we can pray for the willingness. Willing to do what then? Like, what is it that we're going to have to do? And, in Bill's story, it says, page 13, it says this: belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things. Those were the essential requirements. So if you're willing to establish a new order of things and then maintain this order, and what do they mean by a new order? What is that new order? Well, the order is an arrangement or disposition of people or things in relation to each other according to a particular sequence. So it's like, you know, following, and it says sequence, arrangement, organization, structure. So if we have to be entirely willing to establish a new relationship, a new arrangement, and a new structure in our lives, gotta be. Can't keep our old structure. Recovery does not mean that I merely fit my recovery around my life. Like my life, everything is all set. I'll give recovery an hour on Tuesday, half an hour on what? That's not what this is saying. A new order, So it means that I am going to fit my life around this new order, that I'm going to be building a new life. And it means I'm going to be participating and cooperating in the creation of this new structure. The other definition of order means a command or direction. And I think, isn't that just what this is all about? A new director, a new boss. That really is what's required here. That no longer we have to be willing to say, I had to be willing to say, I'm no longer the boss of my life. I will now surrender and allow a new boss to take lead, the boss, right? The main employer. So let's take a look at how we apply willingness to each of the steps, right? If it's essential, if it's how we're going to maintain and produce this new order, let's look at each step. Step one, willingness. And the 12 and 12 in step one, it says this, page 24. Under the lash of alcoholism, we are driven to AA, for me, OA, and there we discover the fatal nature of our situation. Then and only then do we become as open minded to conviction and as willing to listen as the dying can be. We stand ready to do anything which will lift the merciless obsession from us. So, willing to be open minded to conviction, right? And willing to listen to direction and to do anything, taking action in order to get well. And when we say to do anything, we mean do anything that sounds like it's recovery related and about building a relationship with God. It's certainly not willing to, commit a crime. That is not what this program is about, right? This is not willing to take my life savings and give it to some stranger. That's not what this is about either, right? It's willing to live in by these principles. And to do, really, I had to be willing to take direction from a sponsor who was a carrier of the hope for me. She shared with me, I heard her story, I knew enough of it, and I saw she no longer lived that way. So I had to be willing to do what she did, right? Um, and how it works, page 58 says this: if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. So, step one also requires a decision that you want what others have and are willing to not stay on the sidelines any longer, merely watching others recover, being a spectator while they're living their recovered lives, but actually doing, participating. And I would say it like this: when I work with a sponsee, one of the things I might say with our Zoom world, I would say, you know what, put on your camera. Like, I would say, like, that's a first demonstration of willingness. There are things that we are powerless over, and there are things that we are not powerless over. And I have had situations with people where that was where my sponsorship or the ability to sponsor them ended. I had someone say to me, I'm just too shy. I can't do it. And I said, well, I think you could at least do it. You might not need to speak, but I would believe that that would be a step of willingness. Then I would determine whether or not I'm going to invest lots of time helping you. This is something that I believe you could do. I believe that it's possible to do it. And so, you know, it means that you're ready to take action, right? Just like I had to get up in the middle of the night to take care of that baby. Might not have wanted to, but I was willing to do it because it was important. And there's a solution, page 25 to 26. It says, this we did. It talks about we've reached a point from which there's no return through human aid. We have but two alternatives. One is to, in, live with like blotting out the intolerance of our situation as best we could. And the other one is to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to accept spiritual help. That's what they're referring to. And we're willing to make the effort. So that is also, that is a requirement. I cannot conjure up the honest desire to get well, to seek a relationship with God. That's got to come from within. Somebody has to have that already at the table, right? Saying, like, yes, I want this. I want this. And willing to make the effort. Yes, willingness to do things that require effort. So it's understood that willingness is ready to work hard and exert all our effort. Step two, willing to believe. In Big Book, We Agnostics, page 46, it says this. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. So, step two means we are willing to believe that which we cannot define or understand. And that was a big one. That I love when I heard a fellow say that she does not have to understand God, but she does have to stand under him. And I was like, that is exactly what this is. Willing to seek something that might not make sense. And another thing, like I would say, is when I begin working with people, someone might say to me, I don't believe in God. And I say, do you want to? Because that's the requirement. You have to honestly want to and are willing to make the effort. And so I might say, you might not believe yet, but do you long to believe? Are you willing to do everything in your power to form a relationship, to have a belief? And that is a requirement. That is a requirement. So if somebody says to me, no, no, I really don't. No, thank you. Don't believe in God. Not interested in ever believing God. Um, I I would say to them, I'm a practitioner of this book. And does that mean you can never get relief from a food addiction if you don't believe in God? No, you might be able to, but not as a practitioner of this book, because this book is very clear that the purpose of this book is to enable the sufferer to form a relationship with a power. So that's the purpose of this book. So as a practitioner of this book, that's the only solution I go with. Um, and I think that, I can be really clear about that. Okay, so in Bill's story, it says this. There's oh no, in We Agnostics it says so. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. So, what's the difference between believing and willing to believe? Willing means that there might still be some uncertainty, some doubts, and some misgivings, but you're open to the possibility and you're ready to do anything to go even further and even more. You're going to live by the principles which will lead you into a willingness to have a relationship with God, a personal and intimate connection. And I would say we take those actions to invite God in, right? And in Bill's story, page 12, it says this: there had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. So we need a humbleness to have him with me. And we're assured if we have that, he'll come. Um, and so um, page 28, and there's a solution. It says this: if what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. And, when I read that paragraph, I actually get the chills because for me, it is it is confirmation that this text was God inspired. Because I don't think men of that time period were talking about something so inclusive. It's so open and inviting to people of whatever race, creed, color. We're all children of God, and that all I need is to be willing and honest enough to try. Just think that's so beautiful. So we hold space in our hearts, and our day. That's what it means to be willing to try. I must hold space in my heart and in my day. Prayer and meditation is an action we must be willing to do. In practical terms, what do you have to be willing to do? Get up earlier for many of us. It's an action that we're open and willing to practice repeatedly, to try honestly. And I mean, I have seen the most incredible things happen for people who said that they weren't sure that they believed. As soon as they started making a practice of seeking God every single morning, without fail, I have seen people have that thing come alive inside of them. It has happened, right? Step 3, willing to turn our lives over to the care and protection of God. And and it says, that I have to be willing to turn myself, all of me, over to God's care and God's protection. And I find that so beautiful and reassuring that um why wouldn't I want that? All my life, right? We all long for feeling safe and feeling protected and feeling okay in an unsettled existence of this universe. But we're told that we can turn over ourselves to God's care and God's protection. And in working with others on page 93, it says this: the main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he lived by spiritual principles. I have to be willing to live by spiritual principles. I have to be willing to just do things that that benefit others, that are good for the welfare of others. Page 158 in A Vision for You, it talks about the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. He took a third step, right? A true third step. He was willing to depend upon a higher power. And in the AA 12 and 12 in step 3, page 36 says this, and the facts seem to be these. The more we become willing to depend upon a higher power, the more independent we actually are. And in how it works, it says, these are all related to step 3, by the way. Page 60, the point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. So the willingness of step 3 means that we go from belief to reliance. The more we depend on God, the freer we become. We stop forcing life and its people to conform to our design. Rather, we seek God's design. We become willing to give God our thoughts, our hearts, our lives, our words, everything. And in fact, the purpose of doing that is not so that we get well. It's actually so that we can show others how powerful and wonderful God is. So I'm willing, I say this, I have to be willing to be on team God. Like that's step 3. Now I'm on your team, God. I'm going to work for you. You're going to be my boss. I'm going to go from this position of where I used to tell God, I used to want to give God knowledge of my will for him and ask him to have the power to carry out my will. And step 3 is the reverse. I ask God to just consistently, please give me knowledge of your will for me, and then give me the power to carry that out. It's a reverse order. I have to learn how to be willing to rightly relate myself to God. And I'd say, if I'm on Team God, it means that I make my life all about being God's PR person, right? That any recovery I have, it's to promote, right, what a relationship with God can do for you through my actions, but not just my words. And I'm willing to grow and grow and grow in this way. This is where I'm willing to grow. Step 4, my willingness in step 4, page 50 in the AA 12 and 12 says this, now willing to commence the search for his own defects. He will ask, just how do I go about this? How do I take inventory of myself? So we need to be willing to begin the inventory process. We are called to search out our defects. And I always notice that it says search, which means I'm willing to really look hard, not at other people and not at how they've let me down, but my own defects. And it says this as well on page 52, if I'm unable to change the present state of affairs, am I willing to take the measures necessary to shape my life to conditions as they are? So, step 4 means that I am willing to accept current situations. And instead of trying to get those present circumstances to change, I have to be willing. I have to be willing to do the changing. You know, I had a sponsor that used to say that all the time, bless them, change me. Bless them, change me. That really is for me the heart of step 4, right? Remember, how anger is the dubious luxury of normal men, and how argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. So I become willing to walk away from the fight, right? Even risk being seen as weak or a pushover. When I read the chapter I've been reading every morning or really listening to, acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. One of the things that I have to be willing to do is to give up my rights. Well, little uncomfortable to say this out loud, but when I go from acceptance for my circumstances and then my rights try to move in, I lose my serenity. When I am overly focused on the preservation of my rights rather than the possible acceptance of my circumstance, I begin to lose my serenity, right? So now it does not mean that I can't have morals and principles and views about the world, but I always have to temper it with acceptance for life as life is, right? I have to be willing to fit myself into my present day circumstances. Step 5 says this: I have to be willing to be entirely honest with someone and willing to take advice and accept it. In the 12 and 12, it says on this page 59, only by discussing ourselves, holding back nothing, only by being willing to take advice and accept direction could we set foot on the road to straight thinking, solid honesty, and genuine humility. And no, that does not mean you just go to anybody with this. This is not, you don't like go to just any old person in the world. You're supposed to tell somebody who has what you want, someone who's understanding but unaffected, who knows what it is you're driving. So when you bring your step 5 to someone, it ought to be someone who has what you want, who's walking the walk, and that their advice and their direction sounds reasonable for living your life. In page 59, it says this. Oh, I read that. In page 60 and how it works, it says the point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. So what does that mean? It means I'm willing to grow towards my ideals. And in the big book, it says on page 69, whatever your ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. And I think, like, okay, so step 5, I have the willingness to allow another person to know me entirely, to listen to their feedback, to take their suggestions and directions. I say I had to stop trying to seem better than I actually believed myself to be. I had to no longer be the PR person for Melissa. Remember, in step 3, I'm going to be the PR person for God. And step 5, I say, well, then I can't be the PR person for me. I can't be out there trying to sell me, you know, at the expense of having true integrity. And I have to sit there and really listen to constructive feedback. And I gotta say, when we do, a fifth step with someone, and you're a sponsor and you're giving that constructive feedback, it can be. People sometimes don't like to hear it. They come back afterwards really angry, feeling like you were perhaps insensitive or uncaring, or you shouldn't have said that. And yet, we really are told here, as someone who is giving their fifth step, that we actually have to be willing to listen to constructive feedback from someone who's been helping us all along, who we asked because they have what we want. And so I also have to be willing to have God mold my ideals and willing to grow towards this. And I think, when God molds my ideals, so I sometimes feel the pressure of my ideals being molded. You know, it's like I can feel something no longer feels good anymore. It feels uncomfortable. There's a little pressure there. And I have to be willing to take actions as I feel I'm being directed. God molds my ideals. In step 6, it says if we answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. So there it is again. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. So if there's a defect that we're clinging to, we just keep praying, right? We ask God, please help me. Please help me with this. Step 7, when we're ready, we say something like this: My creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. So I have to be willing to keep my attention on my own character defects and not criticize others for their shortcomings. Step 7 means I'm willing to ask God to remove my defects. And then we move on to step 8, right? And I would say for step 7, I consistently ask God to remove my defects. You know, that's it's not a one and done. We say it when we take our 7th step, but I repeatedly say it because every time I inventory, every time I do a review, I have not been, turned white as snow. I still have defects. And I consistently ask God to please remove them. And for me, it's usually selfishness. It's selfish. I have lots of things I want. I want things my way. Um, and so, step 8 and 9, willing to clean up the wreckage of our past. And, it says in Bill's story on page 13, I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals admitting my wrong. I might, into action, even if you lose your position, your reputation, we are willing. We admit, page 67, we admit our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. We're willing to set things straight. It says we made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. The word willing is all over the place. It's pretty important. It's every step requires willingness. So I must be willing to make amends where I've done harm, as long as I don't bring more harm by doing it. And I have to be willing to do what I believe God would have me do, to make restitution, to seek my integrity above my reputation. That's really what I found out was all about making amends. Was I had to be honest about who I was, the things I did, without fear of what other people are going to think of me, even willingness to risk my own personal comforts. And it says here, even your own freedoms, right? Yikes. Step 10 says, willing to continue to watch for our defects and keep our channel clear, to consistently inventory and turn to God. I'd be willing to make a practice of looking at myself critically, right? To really be able to consistently do this and turn to God. And step 11, willing to pray and meditate consistently to seek God. And step 12, willing to work with others, to work day and night, to be inconvenienced and to offer people care. And I would say, if we're going to close, I would think about in Vision for You. It says, page 159, they were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. So we tell our stories. In this, they told their stories and specifically their problems in an honest desire to be helpful to those that still suffer. Um, I in the family afterward, it talks about willing to turn the past to good account. I have to be willing to talk about my past so that it can be useful for other people. And then last, to build a fellowship, willing to build a fellowship, to find a sufficient substitute for the food. And in Vision for You, it says this: yes, I'm willing, but am I consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum? Like some righteous people I see, I know I must get along without liquor, but can I have you a sufficient substitute? And then we're told you can duplicate this with such backing. What we have accomplished, it's only a matter of willingness, patience, and labor. So we need to be willing. And I would say here, number one, right? Or number whatever. Stop seeking food as entertainment and leisure, and seek human connection through the steps and the fellowship. We have to be willing to pour into others, to be a we and not a me. And with that, I'll pass. Thanks.